Hey guys, today I had the massive pleasure to interview KLAUS LOTZ from PERMADYNAMICS. Excuse the really poor quality of video. It was quite dark outside and trying to figure out some way of making some better quality content. But yeah, there's really some nuggets in here that you will absolutely appreciate, I'm sure. So let's jump into it.
So, let's begin with this interview. So, today I'm interviewing KLAUS LOTZ from PERMADYNAMICS, which is a syntropic agroforestry and permaculture family project in North Island of New Zealand that I went to volunteer for 5 weeks, 1.5 years ago. Klaus has been practicing syntropic ag for about 40 years now. He first started with Ernst Götsch at his first farm there in 1984. The farm that he just had bought. And he learned from there and worked to land in Bolivia for a few years until he ended up in New Zealand as a permaculture teacher. He then ended up buying land with his family and restored 2 acres of steep clay slope using the technique of syntropic ag. And Klaus, is there anything else you would like to add concerning your background that might be useful for this interview?
No, that was a nice summary. Thank you very much. And you've been here, you know the place. It was nice spending the time with you here. And looking forward to answering your questions on what you have to offer to your group.
Yeah, right. So let's jump into the questions then. So really, you've been one of the first guys that got into syntropic agroforestry after Ernst Götsch. So I'm wondering, in 1984, when you went to work with Ernst on his farm in Bahia, in Brazil, what are like the key lessons that you learned from him?
Well, when I was there the first time, it was when he just bought his farm, and it was basically 500 hectares of scrubland, a very kind of human hostile environment, because it had been a very much abused old farmland that just started to go into this, what we now in Syntropic call rampant mess of regeneration, a lot of thorny vines and everything. It was not a very nice environment to work in, and there was no food to be seen in the whole forest and hardly any animals apart from some snakes and rats. So it was not the sort of rainforest paradise that I was sort of expecting going to South America. And the main work at the beginning was basically building huts and starting clearing some of that land and planting bananas. And I spent a lot of time with Ernst on endless car trips, because the family lived like 300, 400 kilometers somewhere else, and we commuted for a while every day. So I had endless amount of time to ask Ernst just about anything. And that formed the basis of my understanding about regenerative agriculture. And I started from zero. I had no clue how to produce food, really, apart from some idealistic dreams how that could look like. So at that time, his theory was already quite well formed from work that he did on another farm that he managed in Brazil, in Bahia, a cocoa farm. And prior to that, he was working a few years as a manager on a farm in Costa Rica, where he learned from Maya Indians how to do farming in the forest, which I think is still the most advanced art of syntropy that these guys had been shown Ernst at the time. And he wrote about it in his little pamphlet, Breakthrough in Agriculture. So that formed his basis for understanding what pruning can do in agriculture, leading to syntropy. So I learned all these concepts from him, but on the farm itself, there wasn't much to be seen. But what I learned from him at the time was his systematic approach to regenerative work, his incredible work ethic. I mean, I've not again in my life come across somebody with such a high work ethic as Ernst, and his unbreakable strive to always come up for something still better, how to work even better with nature in terms of promoting life and enhancing conditions. Yeah, that's the main principle of syntropy, enhancing life processes wherever you are, and how incorruptible he was on that, and how he never looked at his own personal comfort, and always was striving for bringing his fullest to any environment that he was working in, to awake the land basically to a higher potential. Yeah, there was just no compromise on his side, and there was his drive. It was incredible drive. So I guess to some degree that washed off on me, and hasn't left me since. And also the understanding of landscapes, what they are due to abuse by humans, and what they could be if we would do it right. That understanding, that reading of a landscape, I did learn a lot about that from him, to the degree that I can't travel anymore without looking out of the window of a bus or so and seeing the landscape screaming, crying out for a change to the management system. And you just feel like you want to jump out of the car and run over and do some resuscitation procedure on the land immediately because it's screaming. So yeah, that feeling hasn't
I think it's common in all of us that practice this. I have the exact same thing. You know, I'm in the car, I see this, I'm like, oh, if we use Syntropy over there, that would be so much better. Everywhere I have that.
Or the urge that you have to jump out of the car and collect some seeds because you see something in that environment. Yeah, so all of that got implanted in me from spending quite a lot of time with him. So it was first in '84 for maybe 7 months I worked with him, and then in '88 another 6 months I worked with him. And at that point he had advanced his technique. He learned a lot, and suddenly what looked like very frustrating approaches the first time around when I saw him, a lot of failure. The theories were there, but somehow it hasn't translated into the practice yet. The land was incredibly challenging, incredibly unfertile and compacted and all lot. Mm-hmm. And then the second time around when I saw it 3 years later, he had figured out a lot of things, and suddenly it clicked, and he found the right plants to unlock the potential of the soil.
Just to put this into context, so you came in 1984. For how long were you here with him? Were you there?
Half a year, and then I had to leave Brazil to renew my visa. So I traveled.
Okay.
I traveled to Bolivia to see a friend that worked with me at Ernst.
Yeah.
And then carried on through Peru. Mm-hmm. Did a bit of woofing in Peru in the rainforest, and got to know. I got to work with some indigenous people there that worked some rubber rounds, going around the rainforest and tapping native rubber trees. Mm-hmm. I did that for a couple of months with them. It was an amazing experience. That's when I actually experienced a fairly undisturbed Amazonian rainforest in all its glory. Okay. Full of monkeys and deer and jaguars and all the lot. And at the same time, you felt like you were in some sort of Garden Eden that provided everything that you needed in your life.
Wow. And then you went back in 1987, then 3 years later, right?
Well, then as I finished that round, I spent another 2 months at Ernst seeing everything with different eyes again after having been in the Amazon, realizing what he tried to create. Because before that, I hadn't seen a proper rainforest. in his land, that shrub grows that looked like a jungle. It was not a it was not an abundant system, basically. It was an accumulation system. And you can see the difference once you are in an abundant system rainforest, and you can see the potential of it. And then you want to go out and do it everywhere the same. You know, you want to bring every land into that process of getting to an abundant, diverse rainforest, or whatever the climate allows. Once you have seen that difference and have understood what the steps are to get you there, you just start getting kind of a bit frustrated and angry with humans that they can't figure that out and do it everywhere. And that's what I noticed in Ernst. He, at the time, I think he's much more mellow nowadays, but at the time he came across as a very angry person, sort of anger driven by his frustration why other people can't get it. And he actually didn't have much time for people that wouldn't even try to get it. So he often came across as quite arrogant and angry and bad-tempered, but there was this massive frustration in him to understanding the paradise that we could be living in everywhere, and creating this paradise all around us by bringing every landscape into an abundant system, rather than spiraling everything down into abused landscapes that require a lot of inputs over which we have to fight, and then still produce diseased crops that require more inputs. So yeah, I can understand totally his frustration, and yeah, it made sense to me later on. So yeah, there is that. Once you understand all of that, then you can get quite frustrated with the rest of the world. Why not everybody is doing that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I've definitely had a lot of people that I've met him that say that he's quite bad-tempered as well, and that yeah, a lot of people say this, and you told me stories yourself. But yeah, the truth is, with this practice, what I find is that the way that we communicate about it makes a massive difference. If we're getting frustrated at other people because they don't know about it, it's because it's also put in a way that's so complicated. And I think that that's the thing. It's a lot of people need to practice it rather than just get into too much of the theory, which Ernst is very much onto, because he's got a very, how would I say, a genius kind of brain, I think.
Oh, yeah.
In the way that things are explained, it's very complicated. If you're not technical, you're not going to get into it, and that's the thing. And that's what that's what I understood from other agroforesters here. A few friends of mine who work in more subtropical climates, and they've told me that when they consult for farmers, they need to make it much more simpler than all this crazy stratification consortiums and all this stuff, which it can work to like approach it like that. By the end of the day, 90% of the people are not going to get into it if you approach that in such a way. And if on top of that you add anger to it, I guess that it doesn't really drive the point so well. But I guess he's gotten to understand that over time, I suppose. Right. I suppose.
Yeah, what you're bringing up is making it complicated and so on. I came to realize, you see, there's three phases in looking at syntropy, and I got that from something else. Someone said that about something else, but it applies to syntropy as well. When you first look at the syntropy concept as a beginner, it looks very complex, like, oh, really hard to understand. I can't make sense of it. It's just beyond, I don't know anything, and it's, yeah, too complex, right? Okay. Then you put your mind to it, you get into it, you learn about it, this and that. And then you get to a point where it looks incredibly simple. Yeah, of course, it's like that. It's simple, yeah. So you get there after a few years. Oh, yeah, it makes all sense now. I get it. Penny dropped. It's very simple. And that's the point where a lot of syntropic practitioners start teaching. They think they have it all figured out now. 3-4 years in the game. And then when you do it longer, it starts looking incredibly complex again, to the point that you feel like, shit, I still know nothing about it. I'm just scratching the surface. And you suddenly start wondering what the heck you're actually talking about. You don't know nothing yet. That's the third phase. and yeah, so yeah, you can go through different levels of understanding it. And yeah, I feel like I'm in the third phase now. It's things that I thought I had figured out, I can see so many nuances again in it that I feel like I'm still a beginner. It's it's such a universe out there. We are scratching only the surface.
Yeah, it's this feeling of how would I say? It's this feeling of the more you know, the more you learn, and the less you know, basically.
Yeah.
It's this feeling there, but I think it's I guess it's the way to start with that should be quite simple, I think, and that's why I really liked this concept of this infestation Scott Hall talks about, and that Ernst has actually implemented. Well, I mean, I guess you've even seen him trying to do this approach from the beginning there, but it's more about like the entry point, I think, for people that matters, because at the end of the day, then you can learn the technicalities after. But I think a lot of us are more like practical minded. You need to see it like work in practice first, in a way. So yeah, definitely there's this thing in this space, this sort of like nerding out on things rather than really like practicing, like going into all these Excel sheets and this plant list that are like hundreds of plants, and then trying to figure out, and then people get confused because of what someone else said when it's not really their practice, they haven't experienced it. And then they start saying, oh, this plant grows really fast, or this plant, no, this plant's slow, this plant doesn't work in this soil, doesn't work in this climate, or whatever. But at the end of the day, they haven't really had the experience with it, and they're just like projecting something they've seen, not that they've experienced. I mean, what I see, and that just makes me want to actually go to the second question, which is, what made you stick with Syntropic Ag over other practices of permaculture? What is it that really made you stay with that over all of these?
I think I came to Syntropy in cycles. So first, after doing the 2 stints with Ernst, I got really inspired, but I didn't really understand a lot of depths to it. And there was nothing written about it. Even his own pamphlet, Breakthrough in Agriculture, I only found later on. He hadn't written it at the time anyway. And after I worked with Ernst, I actually got sort of sidetracked, and I went on moving on to Bolivia, and I worked with an American guy in a little workshop working with appropriate technology. So I had a bit of a mechanical background myself, and so we sat together and did problem solving for small farmers in Bolivia, whatever they needed. We made rope pumps and small semi-mechanic spinning machines and water heaters and small water turbines and stuff like that, pumps, and made that available to small farmers. So I did that for 2 years, and I kind of forgot agriculture. But then through our work, I got to know a few farmers and made friends with them, and then tried stuff out with them to produce a bit of electricity for them so they could read in the evening or whatever. And at the same time, I played around in the fields with them, trying to sort of get them onto different ways, like, for instance, discourage them from burning new fields and talk about slash and slash and drop rather than burning. Yeah, that was a big thing in South America. Everybody just burned all the time. And that was something that I took from Ernst away, you know, you don't burn. But that's already against the grain in South America. Every farmer burns. And he would totally lose his temper when he would see farmers in the neighborhood burning. You know, he would just froth from the mouth, and I can understand that. But yet, it was the normal thing to do, and there are reasons for that too. I can understand it more now than I did at the time why they burn. But anyway, so I tried to work with farmers, putting out some concepts that I carried from Ernst, but it was very superficial. And then later on, when I met my wife and we bought a wee little piece of land in the highlands of Cochabamba, by chance I came across the Permaculture Designer's Manual, and that was the only book I had to read, and that finally gave me a framework. Because what I learned from Ernst, there were sort of bits of information that were sort of disconnected, and since I didn't have any farming background, academic or practical, there were sort of bits of information sort of hanging around in my brain somewhere, disconnected. And then that designer's manual from Bill Mollison suddenly gave me that framework to put all of that information. I think that's the beauty of the permaculture designer's manual and the course. It gives you that framework. It's that rope, as Bill Mollison says, where you can put all these different techniques in, like coat hangers, be that biodynamic, be that Manzanova, natural farming, whatever. It can be a tool in that designer's toolkit of permaculture. And you understand how one element comes together with the other tool and so on. So that helped me tremendously. And then once I got into that, I kind of forgot what Ernst told me, and suddenly that was my Bible, the permaculture book, and I looked at these planting designs and did that on our land in Cochabamba. It was semi-arid, and well, I ended up planting everything not dense enough, and the gaps filled up with kikuyu. We had that there, and it was heavy clay, and I mean, most trees didn't survive the first 3 years, and took a lot of work before they died. So it was very frustrating, actually. And then I started agriculture, organic agriculture in Germany as a part-time thing. Through that, I got into biodynamics and so on. But I didn't come across anything that actually helped me doing something better on the land. But just when I wrote my thesis, it's actually just here, funny enough. Somebody in Bolivia gave me that book here written by Joachim Mills. He was the first consultant taking Syntropic, called it dynamic agroforestry, taking that and made money as a consultant. So he works.
How is the book called? Because you can't even see it. There's a flare on the screen.
Agroforestry.
Guide to establish agroforest systems.
You can find it. You can find it on the internet here and there.
Yeah, you can find it in English as well, no?
You can find it in English as well. Yeah. So there was the first publication on Syntropic. Maybe at the same time as Ernst put his pamphlet out, The Breakthrough in Agriculture. But see that one?
Yeah.
You're familiar with the triangle? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first one where that one sort of appeared. And that triangle there, you know, after pondering over that and trying to put it into practical context for a while in Bolivia, finally the penny dropped on me, and when I fully understood that is the
Can you explain a bit of what you mean by what you because I understand, but I don't think people will necessarily understand this triangle.
Well, we all learn in school that succession is sort of a linear process from small plants to big plants and so on, you know. And well, this one here explains that we have cycles: accumulation, transition, abundance, right? And you can go down and you can go up. Burning land gets you down, syntropy gets you up, right? And these are different plant communities. And in order to get there, we need to use the plants from here or even from there, depending, right? And each cycle starts with annuals, ends with long-living ones, right? So that is a model that is less complicated than what you find when you look at ecological models of succession, which is useless for farmers. It's far too complicated. And it is more sophisticated than that linear cartoon model that we get when we learn about succession at school. So it's a sort of interim space that is very useful for agroforestry practitioners. And I think it's that model that made it understandable for agroforestry people to play around with these different plants of different cycles to understand that. So this is our language model on how to use, in permaculture, called the pioneers. Because the term pioneer plant is incredibly confusing in permaculture. It doesn't really tell you much. But when you actually can put plants into these categories, of course, in reality, there may be more than 3 groups, they overlap and all of those sort of things. That's a simplified way of explaining what's going on the land as it recovers. But I found that the most helpful model ever to understand succession and to understand how you can work with succession in agriculture. So what Ernst did with that is he gave us a language so we can communicate all across the world what we are doing.
Yeah. In
And
comparison,
talk about
in comparison to the permaculture, succession is just too simplistic. It's just like plants are not from the forest, end up in the forest and go to the primary. This actually allows you to understand that it doesn't work exactly like that, that these plants are like placenta plants that belong to accumulation systems, whereas there's some other ones that are in the abundance system, like veggies in general. And that you can clearly see. It's like that's just really clear. For example, like that herbs and aromatics in the Mediterranean, like rosemary, artemisia, all that, they can have the placenta plants of the accumulation, whereas the abundance will be like more lettuce, tomatoes, and etc. So it is true that it's very helpful and it's very confusing, the permaculture model, because it's a very linear model. When in reality, when you look at forests, you need to look through time. And I agree that it's a very good model. Yeah.
Permaculture in theory, I mean, when you look at what Bill Mollison taught about agroforestry, the theory was there. You know, he was often talking about one of the principles is embrace rampancy. What does that mean? That means don't get scared of the infestation cycle, right? But in practice, you don't see it. Often these permaculture food forests, they are established looking at these beautiful design pictures that you find in permaculture books, where every tree is spaced to its final distance and whatnot. And yes, in theory, they are, and when you look at Jeff Lawton's establishing food forest videos and stuff like that, in theory it's there, but in practice it's often not done. The planting distance is too big, they have this final picture in mind, they don't want to spend much money on the trees, and they can't figure out which other plants to throw into the mix. In the end, the systems are too open, it invites grass, and before you know it, half the trees die. People get disanimated, they spend all their time on their knees pulling grass out and putting carpets on and shit like that. It goes nowhere. That's unfortunately how a lot of permaculture forests look like. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of them around the world. And when you see when somebody practices syntropy, you can see from a few hundred meters the difference. Of course, now they start to blend. A lot of permaculture food forests, they use syntropic principles as well as they should. And suddenly it starts to blend. But yeah, that's how it used to be. And often people in permaculture, they got scared of rampancy. They got scared of that infestation cycle that they should have. And then also a lot of people that make food forests, they're not coming from a agriculture background, and even if they do, they're not used to the tools that we are using in Syntropy. So if you're not familiar with the use of a machete, facing that rampancy or that infestation cycle can be incredibly daunting. If you go out and face that with your weed whacker, then you kill all these trees that you have in there, or it's just too hard of a job because some of those shrubs you can't really deal with a weed whacker. Or with your secateurs or loppers, you're lost. It just takes too long. And having machinery built for it, it's only making sense on a big scale where you have a very reduced diversity. So yeah, if you're not into swinging a machete, you're lost and you're overwhelmed pretty quick, and then you get behind, and then you're getting frightened by it, and then your neighbors give you a hard time, and your partners and whatnot. So there's all of that. But anyway, back to that model of succession. You see, when I finished university, and I actually used the book when I wrote my thesis, and I got to understand it. And then right after studying, I got this position in the Amazon of Bolivia, where Ernst came for running workshops, and I joined him on one of his workshop tours for a couple of weeks, where we went from one farmer to another every day, another farmer, doing a workshop, doing an installation, doing a retrofit, whatever. That was a brilliant time. I learned so much in those few weeks with Ernst. When I met him, I think it was in the year 2000. He was paid by a German development service to go around doing that as a consultant. And then I worked in that area after he left. My job was to carry on his incentive and made sure that the local technicians were doing what he suggested, putting that in place, continuing that work. I worked with them on a daily basis with farmers, and using that succession model was something that we could teach farmers, even though they were illiterate. Yeah, if we would have gone into something more ecological, academic stuff, forget it. We would have lost them. If we would have got into something more simplistic, they wouldn't have understood what it was all about. So that model actually made it possible for us to teach farmers about syntropy and about natural succession and about why their fields look shit, why they have to move every 5 years to another piece of forest that they would burn down and then grow their crops, why they couldn't stay in the same place. And taking down a new piece of rainforest is a lot of work, especially if you don't have a chainsaw. It's a heck of a lot of work, even if you burn it. And they would have liked to stay on the same piece of land, but the fertility would drop. They wouldn't have money for inputs. And the light sandy soils wouldn't hold the nutrients with annuals. So my job was to get them enthused into growing perennials. So we got them into growing cocoa and bananas as main crops. But at the same time, we came with another 50, 80 species to do the immersion and the ground cover and all of that. And that was not an easy work, because they would say, why should we plant all of that stuff when we just spend weeks and weeks to cut it down and burn it in order to grow our crops? So that was the tricky part. Get them to understand that diversity is important for the health of your crops and the health of the soil and everything. But yeah, that succession model was the tool to get it across to people that couldn't read or write. Yeah.
Right.
And even in a lot of cases didn't even have much of an understanding of the local plants because they were not from that place. There were people from the highlands that moved into the lowlands because the government gave them 25 hectares to do what they want to do with it. And what they did with it was burn it all down and grow rice, and then move on and burn another piece down and grow rice. And my job with the German government was like, do anything you can to slow them down, get them into growing perennial crops, find a market for it, and so on. And yeah, but it worked okay because it was an area where cacao wanted to grow naturally. There was a lot of beautiful, high quality cacao growing in the forest. When Ernst was there, he would always take seeds back home from it because it was some of the finest cacao in the world that grew wild there. It was an amazing, amazing food. It was just unbelievable, the quality of the cacao in the rainforest.
Lovely, lovely. Well, yeah, actually, like you touched a bit on that, but still, it'd be helpful to get an idea of what you think of the way that we're growing food right now and the way that conservation and regeneration is done in the mainstream. What do you think about that? Because, I mean, obviously, with what you do, you know that these things don't make sense anymore. But what's your opinion in terms of like not only where the things are at right now, but how we can make them better? But at the same time, the reality is that we kind of need to find a sort of in between, like the full-blown syntropic agroforestry and the monoculture, very like depleting land and etc. So I'm wondering what's your input on that? What's your insights?
Well, luckily, as you know, we live in a little bubble here. The land around us is too marginal for mainstream agriculture. Low quality soil, very old weathered clay soils. So there's not much conventional agriculture around us apart from a bit of low intensity beef farming and yeah, some pine plantations and that sort of stuff going on with quite a bit of herbicide use. Yes, there's that. But we are far away from the big intensive agriculture that we have further south in New Zealand. So that's good. So I'm not exposed to that too much. But I've seen, of course, enough in my life about that and studied about it. Yeah, makes you just, as I said before, makes you just angry looking at it, and you feel like you want to take the land away from the owners and do something different. But luckily, I don't have to see that every day. There's a lot of effort in conservation in the area where we are, and with a lot of pest control going on, like against rats and possums and so on, animals that can damage the native bush. So a lot of people are very dedicated here to conservation to the degree that they look at us as being kind of a danger to society in a way, cultivating all these exotic plants that might spread into the bush and so on. But funny enough, on our food forest or land, it's not just food forest. We also manage riparian strips and all sort of other marginal areas on the farm with syntropy without it being a food forest as such. I mean, syntropy is a style of management that you can extend beyond food forest per se. You could manage roadsides with syntropy without having to call it a food forest. And you notice that in those areas, these dreaded weeds like tobacco vine and tobacco weeds, people are really worried about here because it's spreading through the neighborhood like crazy. And where does it spread? It spreads in areas that are disturbed, like roadsides or soil after pine rotations finish. That soil turns into real weed promotion areas, with tobacco weed going nuts, getting spread by birds, and then the helicopter has to come and spray it all out every year. So these are weed factories, right? This is land that is trying to go into some rampancy of accumulation or transition plants in order to restore something on the way to abundance, if that's possible.
Yeah.
And of course, what people then do is come with a helicopter and spray herbicides, bringing it another notch down in the succession ladder. And then wondering why the weeds are getting even worse. And conservation, on the other hand, is trying to maintain these pockets of natural forest as a museum. And well, that museum is just not possible because we have so many changes. With climate change, things get hotter, they get drier or wetter. So what we have now is we have kauri dieback. It's a type of Phytophthora that kills kauri trees. Well, if it means that's the end of kauri trees, what will replace kauri trees? So quite possibly we will have eucalypts and pines going around filling those gaps that the kauris are leaving. So how is that going to be for a museum? Are they going to stop pine plantations, eucalyptus forests, because they're worried about their native forest being taken over by eucalypts because they can handle the drought and the heat better? And we have lost animals that were quite keystone species in either seed dispersal or undergrowth management. For instance, moa got extinct something like 500 years ago after having been here for probably millions of years, being the big browser in the understory, pruning trees. So that's gone. So how can you talk about a museum when you have lost one of your keystone species and that's not going to come back? So you cannot maintain a status quo with conservation because there are too many factors that are changing. So I think they have to wake up to the fact that we are by default creating what David Holmgren calls novel ecosystems. They're kind of resembling the original forest, but with certain changes to it. And at some point, they will find a certain balance. And we have to accept that. We can put resources on it as much as we want, and probably sooner or later we run out of money to finance these efforts. So sooner or later we will have a novel ecosystem if we want it or not. We can't prevent that. So we might as well put our head around that. And maybe we can steer it a bit and prevent a cycle into what's called, I think, a pyrophilic ecosystem could easily happen here. You probably have it in Spain already. You have it in Australia, an ecosystem that can tolerate fire and thrives on fire. Well, when we get into that, that's going to be awful for people because then we have constant wildfires. At the moment here in New Zealand, we are not there.
Yeah.
But we could easily get there. And I think syntropic food forests, or whatever you do with syntropy, even if you use it for restoration projects of creating new forest ecosystems, leave the food out if you want. But if you have restoration projects, you're well advised to use syntropy as a management system as well, rather than use herbicides. And then by default, you're going to create a more abundant oriented system, which by default is usually fire retardant. And I think that is one of the biggest potentials of syntropy. It's even if you leave the food production out, which is important, of course, because that feeds us for doing these restorative efforts with syntropy. That's what pays us and feeds us. But even if you leave that out, say you get funding to do reforestation, you would still use syntropy. But what syntropy gives you is it helps you creating that moist sponge that holds water in the landscape, provides more evaporation to create a new climate in your area if you do it on a big enough scale. So you create rainfall in certain areas, like Ernst did on his farm in Bahia.
Yeah.
It prevents erosion, topsoil loss, and at the same time, it prevents wildfires. And if you can prevent wildfires, you prevent loss of biomass, you prevent loss of your sponge building capacity. Because if you're doing a restoration project and you have a wildfire coming through every 5 years, you always go back to zero almost. You're going to be always left in the savanna environment where you have too much grass, where you should have a forest. You always lose your sponge of litter because it burns up. You lose a lot of your wildlife, your seed dispersal agents, because they get toasted. So preventing these wildfires is super important. And syntropic management is, I think, the best tool to prevent wildfires and to fast track the building of those sponges that hold the water in the landscape. So I think that's something we don't talk often enough about, it, the role of syntropy to get out of a pyrophilic situation and into creating a moist sponge, like an oasis of humidity in the landscape that feeds wildlife and creates microclimates and even macroclimates in the long run.
Yeah, I've definitely, that's something also I want to share, this idea of the biotic pump, which is the idea that above a certain scale, I don't remember exactly how many hectares it is. It's probably 100 or 200 or something like that.
Yeah.
Then you really create this mist. And I saw that before. I went to one of the, actually, it's probably one of the, it's a Mediterranean temperate climate close to Lisbon in Portugal, a place called Sintra, which has been planted 200 years ago by some noblemen there. And you can see some trees that I've never seen like that huge. Like plane trees are literally like, yeah, I mean, they're extremely tall, and I've never seen plants like that before. And you realize when you go on a hill, because it's all on a hill, and there's more or less, I believe, more than 200 hectares that got planted there. And when you go there every single morning, and I went there like during the summer, there's like a cloud of mist that comes above the forest, and that feeds that forest. And then you see on the sides, you see that cloud is not present in other places. It's only present there. And that biotic pump thing, that's super important, because it also makes you realize that you can mitigate climate change. And my belief about climate change is simple. It's that it's taking down the forests actually that actually causes a climate change in the end, because we, first off, all of the different temperature gauges that we have and all that, like, of course, like if they put around a city and the city expands, it's going to get higher temperature and all that. And there used to be forests in these places too. And all these microclimates of forests, they really regulate the rainfall and make sure that we're not going to have inconsistent rainfall, and then all's going to flood one place, for example. And yeah, that's just, for me, I find it's just normal. It's the way the planet regulates itself, forests and savanna ecosystems too. But forests have this more capacity to get that moisture in. And yeah, I mean, as you say, all the other impacts too, like prevents erosion, Even to some degree, depending on the plants that you use, it might be mitigating a flood, which you see with mangrove trees and trees that love to be in water. And yeah, fire. That's a big one. Like as you say in Spain, for us, like a lot of forest is not forest. It's like scrubland, which truly is a perfect environment for fire. Because then there's dead branches that fall on the floor, and then it doesn't take much. It takes a piece of glass that is like left on the ground, and then a fire starts. Or it takes someone just throwing the cigarette, and then that's it. It's just hundreds of hectares burn. And same as in Australia. I guess in New Zealand it's less common because you got more rainfall, but there's some places I'm sure on the South Island that must have similar issues. And for sure, that is, yeah, it's all these things that just come together. It's not just about food production at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that whole sponge thing, I think is super important. I don't know if you're familiar with Walter Jäger, the Australian climate scientist. His mantra is always, we need to build sponges in order to absorb water and then evaporate it. So it's all about evaporation. How can you do it? Only if you create a sponge that gives you that water reserve for continuous evaporation through the drought. And our slope, we are on it's a 45-degree slope. I mean, no farmer in the right mind would try to grow any crops on that. It would be normally sheep or pine.
Yeah.
However, we grow bananas, cherimoyas, and everything you've seen here. And when we had these big downpours recently, massive, but see these downpours here, they come in waves. We have these band of rains, and it hammers down, and then it stops for a moment, hammers down again. And these breaks in between, there seem to be just enough to give the land a break to absorb and then take the water through the topsoil coming down like wearing a woolen sweater. It sort of goes through the sweater down, dripping out at the bottom rather than running off on the surface. So that's how our land is now. We have a few terraces, but it's mostly just the topsoil that absorbs the water, no runoff for a long time. And then these intervals where the rain slows down a bit are enough to be ready for the next lot. So the water that is coming out at the bottom of the land has actually gone through the topsoil, and we have to trust that the fungal network in the soil is actually screening out all the nutrients that otherwise would escape. And when we go to the bottom of our slope, no matter how hard the rainfall is, the water coming down that slope is crystal clear. And it's not a lot. A lot of it really gets absorbed in that. Probably it's by now a half a meter sponge where water can percolate in. So half a meter of a sponge, say for a pore volume of say 30%, hopefully. That means it can take a lot of rain before it starts trickling out. Whereas the water coming out of the forest hills above us is chocolate brown. Of course, there are more steeper slopes here and there and erosion pieces and whatnot. And then the interesting thing is when we have flooding like we did recently, there's this chocolate brown water coming out of the forest full of humic acids and clay and sediments and stuff. Debris, a lot of debris. And then it hits the gardens that we have down on the flat, on the alluvial land. And we have grass rows, and it's a more open system. It's more like a savanna. It has grass rows of vetiver grass and miscanthus and bamboo and cocksfoot rows along our beds. It has mulch that's already locked in with mycelium, and it's densely planted. So now the chocolate water from the forest goes through here, and it has to go through the grass, and the sediments fall out. It's quite incredible. And you go to the downside of it, and the water comes out pretty clear. It's unbelievable how much the plants in there can screen the sediments out. And then after the flood is through, you go through there, and even so, we have some annual crops in there. because we're not digging, we're not rotary hoeing, we don't lose any soil, but we gain soil. So here and there you see pockets of sand that build up. Everything is covered with clay. It's almost like as if the leaves of the plants, the blades of the grass, have some sort of static electricity that bind to the clay particles and hold them back. And everywhere you have grass, it's full with debris. So in a flood, we're actually building up soil by harvesting that soil rather than losing soil on the alluvial flats. And that's how it should be. So our plantings are actually soil harvesting devices. So every flood we have, our soil is getting more built up, as it should be in a floodplain.
Yeah, I see.
And you mentioned earlier these cloud forests in the hills of around Lisbon. These areas are gold, of course, and you see farmers around that area. They should be paid to practice syntropy in order to expand these pockets of cloud forest, not just like conservation. Let's make sure that they persist, sort of thing. Yeah, that's great, but we also need to look at how we increase them, because once they increase, say turning sheepland into syntropic food forests in the cloud area, they would be so valuable. It could rehydrate the whole catchment far more than it is now. So farmers should get paid to do syntropy in those areas.
Yeah, and in these areas as well, like the funny thing is, it's not just native species, no? There's eucalyptus in there, there's acacias in there, giant eucalyptus, and still they harvest that. It doesn't matter what tree it is, it's still going to do that. So it's the efforts of conservation are quite limited, let's say, because then you want to replant something that is very slow growing, but what do you have to establish that first? You need that fast growing trees that take the place first. That's how it works. And that's what gets so, what I say, it's as if people just like in the conservation space just completely misapply the idea of succession. They'll just plant anything anywhere, and they don't even see how the soil is actually in place. They just want to plant something that used to be there, but the soil doesn't support that anymore. Like the conditions are just not there anymore. And I mean, and especially true in the Mediterranean. Like a lot of people try to replant some plants that you can't have them thrive here on their own. And people make mistakes, for example, like planting something and even pines or whatever, and then they don't even water them. So yeah, of course, like half of them die. Because back in the day, it wasn't possible. Back in the day, but since we don't have that forest anymore, well, that's what happens, you know. And also there's also this discrepancy, let's say, also between the rainfall that you can find, let's say, 15 minutes away versus where we are. For example, we have the 15 minutes away, let's say 10 kilometers bird's flight. We have the Sierra de Grazalema, which is the place where it rains the most in all of Spain. 2 meters of rain a year. It's insane. And we're just 10 kilometers away, and the rainfall per year is at 500 liters. So imagine if there was continuous forest from that 2000 liter like area, that Sierra, all the way to us. I reckon that we would probably get more than double the rainfall that we get now. I mean, I really believe that that would make a massive difference. But now there's a lot of scrubland, and it's not forest anymore. And then we got these massive fields that are like tilled. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy how volatile like these landscapes are in the Mediterranean. You know, it doesn't take much. You take down a old growth forest there, and then you get some sheep grazing for like not even a decade, and then your soil goes to shit. Doesn't take long in reality.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I'm not I'm all for using native plants. We use a lot of native plants in our food forest. We probably have more native plants per acre than people that pride themselves of reforestation. their land with natives because we have a higher density than anyone else would plant with natives, but they're just in amongst the system. So natives fulfill a really amazing function too, of course. And we have this one native tree here, which is part of the mahogany family, koi. And that is meant to be one of those plants, for instance, that harbor a lot of Pseudomonas syringii bacteria in their stomata, which, when they get taken up through evaporation and in the wind and go up into higher layers of the atmosphere, they can form ice particles, and they help condensing water vapor into white cloud, and then ideally rain as well. So these are, condensation nuclei. So some plants are very good at that. So when we say expand these rain cloud forest sort of environments in order to spread their climate effect like into your area, you might want to look for plants that are good at that, not necessarily the natives, but if there are some that fit that function, of course. But there are probably other plants that you could use there now that it is maybe hotter, warmer, drier than it used to be. For instance, you guys used it Myoporum latum from New Zealand. And so do people in Uruguay. They are not native plants, but they seem to work really well for you guys, yeah? Mm-hmm. We have it growing wild around here. It's used often in amongst reforestation. I think it's a fantastic idea. The plant is fire resistant or retardant and so on. It doesn't get eaten by rabbits, which is an issue here. Personally, I don't use it because it's toxic to animals, and I like to be able to feed branches to goats if I feel like it. Yeah. I don't use it, but it is a fantastic plant. But then probably conservation people in your country would go like, oh no, it's not a native, it's going to take over and this and that.
Yeah, but the real question is take over what? Because for us, we don't have anything that take over. Like it's different in a subtropical climate, like you guys in New Zealand. But even like places like the dunes that you have and all that is the same thing. Conservationists like tend to like conserve dunes that actually need plants to not have the dunes erode. And if these plants are gone, like you will need to put in some new plants that are not necessarily native to save that ecosystem, I believe. And yeah, no, as you say, for the temperate climate and the subtropical, tropical climate, all that, like it's more fine, this idea of using only natives. And again, it depends on the place. But when you're in the Mediterranean, semi-arid and all that, it's like, what's the point? Because nothing will grow there instead, so it's not really taking the place of anything. And every time for myself, what I see is that these plants, when they're there, oh, it's funny, there's a little wild olive that is growing below it, there's a little carob growing below it. That's the only places where they're going to come. They're not going to come in any place where there's nothing. So that's what I mean by succession being completely dismissed. Because these plants in the Mediterranean, it makes a massive difference. Like imagine in a 47-degree summer day, which is like probably the max we get here. Imagine the difference that it makes for a little tree to be under a little 20-centimeter bush, for example, versus being exposed to like the full sun and oxidation. So in reality, it makes 100 times the difference, basically, just that one plant, and it doesn't matter where it's from. And yeah, I mean, I see some groundworks being done with Syntropic ag when it comes to that. I've seen a lot of people that were like native conservationists, which I've convinced like that it works to use these invasive species. And it doesn't take long. You just got to show them, and it's as simple as that sometimes. But yeah, I mean, probably it works very well in my climate because of all the depletion of the land. So it's this is also very revolutionary in advancing like conservation practices and making them actually using these fast growing species. They're not necessarily native, but then cutting them down, but having planted native plants below that can take the place later. And that I think is key. It's really key to the whole thing working, because a lot of conservation is just throwing money into a pit. Like there's just no point to it.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, you see, I believe if you want native plants as being the final stage of your food forest or whatever, like the end goal is that it turns into native forest because you're doing a restoration work. All your native plants that you put in, they should be direct seeded.
Yeah.
A, because it's cheaper. B, because you're going to lose less to windfall and drought and all these sort of things. And then also, a lot of native nurseries grow trees from cuttings because it's easier than going out collecting seeds.
Yeah.
Now, cutting grown native, there's no genetic improvement on it. They're all the same. And they don't have a taproot, so they fall over in the wind. They are more susceptible to drought, so the success rate is much lower. And even if they're grown from seed in the nursery, then usually they are kind of root bound, and they might do okay for 5 or 10 years until the roots that are sort of corkscrewed in the bag, they start to strangle each other.
Yeah.
So you never get the same quality of a tree for long life. I mean, I'm talking about the big trees that become the emergent, long-living forest species. I mean, if some shrubs that are having a limited lifespan anyway in your reforestation doesn't matter. But for the big guys that are meant to be there for the next 200-300 years, they should be direct seeded to ensure that the root formation is just perfect.
Yeah.
You can only do that if you come in with the right pioneers. And in most situations, you're probably confronted with grasses that are not native to the area. So your native pioneer species, they are often not capable of handling those grasses.
Yeah.
So anyway, but my idea is create a food forest, bring some of those plants in from bags, whatever, but have your native trees coming in with the birds, or you direct seed them into your system, because then they are cheap. Otherwise you pay through your nose planting natives, and they don't give you the money back, the natives. And they're more guaranteed for a healthy long life if they're direct seeded, and you have a broader genetic diversity that way. So that's how we do it here. And we actually don't have to do it, because by planting all these exotics that we use, we attract a lot of bird life. They come for the mulberries and all of that stuff. And in exchange, they bring seeds from the primary forest that we have all around us. And they drop the seeds. And so we have an understory of native plants that come up healthy because they're direct seeded.
Yeah. So truly, no, it makes a lot of sense. Like just utilizing the framework itself. No need to necessarily follow all the steps of Syntropic Ag, but just following the framework can be very useful for many things. And I believe that it has potential not only in food production, but in ornamental plantings, for example, city plantings, in conservation, regeneration. Well, anything really, if you want to, I don't know, in conservation, it could be in a way that could promote a certain species of animal that you want to, you want to endure, for example. And it can be for anything. And really, there's much more potential using that than using any other one, any other technique that is just like this random kind of planting, or utilizing only one species, or all that stuff, So I found that truly that's yeah, it brings a lot of potential to all plantings in general, I believe. And yeah, I mean, so just wanted to ask you, like, we just gonna go and onto one more question about syntropic ag in general, and then we'll dive into the more like general things that I want to ask you as well. But what is the like in your 40 years plus of working with syntropic ag, based on like your mistakes and learnings and all that, I'm just wondering what kind of challenges you encountered on your way, and which could be useful for people here who are listening to us to understand and to not make these mistakes. And yeah, and what would be your advice to start your own little syntropic farm if you were like a beginner, someone who just, you know, generally just wants to give it a go?
Um, I think I wouldn't say it was a mistake as such, but maybe a
Lesson.
bad allocation of my time was initially I tried to fix everything by making hugel beds and bringing a lot of recycled stuff, as you do in permaculture. You know, when I started here in New Zealand, I somehow, because I was teaching at the Polytech, I was teaching permaculture, and I found myself in a new situation here in New Zealand where you can get a lot of resources for free that people throw away or even pay you to take away, like grass clippings and hedge clippings and tree prunings and this sort of stuff. You can basically get paid here to take it away. So that was not like that in Bolivia. In Bolivia, you had to pay for everything, you know. There was no waste of much at all that you could use in some ways. And so I just couldn't stop myself from grabbing everything that I could get my hands on it, you know, grass clippings and manure from dairy farms you can have for free for picking. And then there's seaweed on the beach, you know. So I spend a lot of time moving materials onto the land, and I'm sure it helped. But sometimes I forgot over that to just plant more and manage harder.
Yeah.
So I kind of fell into that permaculture trap of the recycling. And there's nothing wrong with it. And it helps, no doubt about it. And our soils are naturally quite empty. And I'm sure it helped restoring them and so on. But I still think biology, living plants on the side, is more important than what you bring in. And in permaculture, we often get sidetracked and go more into bringing stuff in than using biology to its highest potential.
Yeah, so you mean all the fancy amendments that get used usually, yeah, like seaweed, making biochar, making this and that, which are quite time consuming. Yeah.
It is. There's nothing wrong with it. If you have the time to spare it, by all means do it, but don't give it the main focus. The main focus has to be using the right plants, figuring the right plants out, and then really going to town with those plants and manage them timely. Not too early, not too late. Give it the full attention, the right timing is super important.
Yeah, makes sense.
But finding the right species, and yeah, there can be species that you have right under your nose, and some species have taken me years and years and years, basically standing on them and not having realized their potential. And other plants I had to discover they were not around here, and they were the key that unlocked it all. Like, for instance, the Mexican, or I rather like to call them the Bolivian sunflower, the Tithonia diversifolia. I drove past that plant on way to work at the Polytech 3 times a week, and I saw the plant and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I had this instinct that it was the plant that I needed, because it reminded me of plants that I had seen in recovery phases as a infestation vegetation in some old fields in Bolivia, because I hung out with farmers in a similar climate as we have here, sort of subtropical, warm-temperate East Andes sort of cloud forest environment. That was my favorite area in Bolivia, the area where you could just about grow coffee.
Mhm.
Sort of what we have here. We can just about grow coffee here. And I saw that sunflower there in old fields, and I knew the rampancy that it could produce, but somehow forgot about it. I never used it in Bolivia. And I never heard anyone else in Syntropic using it either. I didn't see it at Ernst. He never talked about it. And then it was probably something like 12 years ago that I finally approached that landowner and said, "Hey, you have this plant. I've never seen it anywhere else around. What is it? I need to know what it is." And he gave me a plant that he'd potted up. And from there on, I propagated, and I pretty quick saw the effect that it had on grasses, particularly kikuyu. It is like a selective herbicide on grasses. And in its shade, we had all these natives coming up that normally didn't come up easily by themselves. So I found that it was an amazing nurse crop. It was a great goat fodder. And it was a massive producer of biomass. And at the same time, it would knock out kikuyu, which is the most dreaded grass here. And we started selling sticks of it. And then people kept selling that again. And so by now, there's one plant we had in the hothouse at the time.
Okay, so you've contributed to infestating that plant all over New Zealand.
I was already getting criticized by conservation fanatics that this plant is spreading everywhere. It's showing up everywhere. And I said to them, look, it's not just showing up everywhere. It's deliberately propagated because people realize that when they have that, they don't need to use herbicides.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you put it like that, this is there's a way to convince these people. Yeah, in a way, I guess.
No, I don't think I convinced them.
Yeah. I mean, over time, it's going to take a lot of patience, but yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so that plant really unlocked everything for us, and then there are some natives that did the same. Some natives just stand out and they just fit into that way of management totally. So there's some native trees that I wouldn't want to do without, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, some things might be under your nose, and some things you just have to actually really browse through plant lists to figure out what they are. But then when it comes to design, to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever done a design in my life. When maybe as a sort of a funny exercise when I got bored or insecure or something like that, or some people that just harass you for some design and then you end up doing a sketch for them just to keep them happy. It's just like doing a horoscope for somebody. Okay, you need that to figure out your life. Here's a horoscope. But the way I learned Syntropic with Ernst, he did some sketches at the time when he started. It was always like, oh yeah, we put the bananas 4 by 4 meters, and then in the center we put a peach palm with a cacao seed on its base. These sort of sketches, very, just to get some orientation into the system. You need a grid. You need a grid of 4 by 4, whatever, so you know where the lines are. That makes total sense. And if you use machinery, you have to adjust that to the width of your mower or hay raking equipment, whatever. So you do that. The spacing of your lines is important. But over the next few years, that is going to blur anyway. And after 10 years, you don't see lines anymore. But For us here, our lines had to be contour line because we are on 45-degree angle. Going up and down the hill like they often do in Syntropy made no sense for us here. We had to stick to contour lines. And you need a tree row to actually hold your slope in place. So we use these flame trees. It's a hybrid legume tree, and we plant them not because they fix nitrogen, but because they're the most prunable, fast-growing, soft biomass that you can ever think up here. And probably most people would have thought that was my biggest mistake ever, that I used those trees. And I can tell people that was the best choice I've ever made. Yeah. And really going big on it. And that's something I learned from Ernst. When you figure out that a certain plant is going to be the key for you, you go big on it. You go big on it, whatever that be. You're not timid with it. You really go for it. And that's what I did with flame trees. So I planted them every 1.2 meters because that was the width of my A-frame. So I went across the slopes with my A-frame, staking out the contour lines. Then I drilled holes and put these sticks of wands of flame tree in and filled the hole with sand around it.
Yeah.
And it was a starting point, and it gave me an anchor in the soil, and it gave me something to hang on to when I had to swing myself around on those steep slopes. And then I started piling logs behind it as they came along, either from existing vegetation of the scrub that was there or the flame trees as they grew older when I cut them back. And these are our lines, but I wouldn't call it exactly a design. It was a strategy. So I'm more into strategy rather than design. But in order to put your strategy into place, you need an orientation, you need some lines. But what grows in those lines, yeah, you can design your time away on those things, or you just figure out, I need that and that and that species, something for the long run, something for the short run, something for that strata, that strata, that strata. But the distance between them doesn't matter because you overplant anyway.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to do? Then some natives are going to come up. Like, for instance, here for us, we get a lot of cabbage trees coming up, a beautiful species, super useful. We plant some of them, but we also get a lot dropped by birds. So what are we going to do with the ones that don't show up in our tree lines? Are we going to chop them out? No. So suddenly they become part of our design. So are we going to stick to a design and cut the ones out that don't show up in the place they're meant to be? So before you know it, your design becomes random. And yeah, I've not done a design. But yeah, some clients definitely want the design, and I lost clients because I told them, I don't want to make a design for you. I can be your mentor and teach you. What I want to accompany you in your way of figuring out for yourself. And we have certain tools like SAP that can help you to figure out what plants you might want to use and make sure that you cover all the requirements of the future in space and time, how to use that. And then you go with that. I don't need to hold your hand on that. And I don't need to make a design for you that it's never going to look like that in reality anyway.
Yeah.
But there's still some clients that I would lose because they want this design that they can hang on the wall and focus on it so they can manifest it or whatever. Or they have to show somebody in order to get funding or whatever, like a business plan sort of thing. And Frida, my daughter, she loves plotting out designs. And I mean, to be honest, it can give you a starting point and some orientation. I'm not saying that having a design is useless. For some people, it's very helpful to get started because they need something visual to project the effort into. But See, when I learned it from Ernst, as I said, we did the bananas 4x4 meters. It was our orientation. Everything else was coming in as we had it. And when we worked in Bolivia, there was no nursery to go to and say, I need 100 of those and 50 of those and 300 of those. And then you laid out into your design pattern. There was no way of doing that. So it was like we would show up with a truckload of banana pups. We would space them out 4x4 meters, and they had a stick on them, so we knew where they were. And then we would lay out very crude pattern. So I would rather call it a pattern rather than a design. We would lay out a pattern on a mat in miniature where we would show farmers, okay, here we have our banana rows. Then in the center, we're going to put the cassava. And on the foot of each cassava, we put a cacao seed. Of course, it's far too dense, but they're cheap. We can cut them out later. And then we put palms seeds in the rows of the bananas. And then we put some taro in between. And then here we have a whole bucket full of such and such tree seeds because we found them on the way to work. And they go in there. And then you guys have to later on, when the seeds are ready for such and such, have to put those seeds in here. That was our design work. And then we had bucket loads of pigeon pea or canavalia, the check beans, and then they would go into that row or maybe scattered broad around it. And then we would say to them, hey, look, now you go and plant the whole thing out in corn, just like you normally do. You go around with a planting stick and make a hole every 30 centimeters and put some corn seeds in, and knew how to do that. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing became a cornfield. Right? But in amongst that cornfield, there were these bananas coming up in the 3x3 or 4x4 meter grid. And there was cassava coming up in that cornfield. And we knew that at the foot of the cassava, we had to be careful because there was a little cacao tree coming up. So a lot of those fast growing pioneers or whatever, herbaceous or shrubby plants, like cassava, whatever, they were markers for the long-living crops or trees, whatever we had. Or we would put pineapples in there, and the pineapple, they come in as a plant already, yeah, as a crown. The pineapple would mark where the cocoa would come up. Mm-hmm. So that when you do your weeding, you're not chopping into this young cocoa plant, and you would know where they are. Yeah. But at the same time, the whole thing was a cornfield, a random cornfield. There were no rows of corn. It was, you know, I mean, when we did these plantings, often farmers would insist on burning. So we would come into a field that was burned with all sort of crisscrossing trunks of trees lying around. Or if we could convince the farmer not to burn, we would come in with a slash team and we would bring one chainsaw. The farmer was happy, somebody shows up with a chainsaw. So we take a secondary forest down with trees, say like that, like cecropias and stuff like that. We would take them down. Might have been a regrowth of 10 years, 15 years. That would be a normal cycle of recovery. It was a lot of biomass, and we would put it down sort of kind of parallel to have it sitting down nice to keep it moist. But we would start first with the undergrowth. We would clear that with machetes. And then we would come in, plant the bananas and the corn and everything. And then we would come in with a chainsaw, machetes, and take all the rest down and have all of the rest of the biomass covering all the stuff that we planted in there. Meanwhile, we were able to work in the shade, which was nice. And then afterwards, it was this massive carpet of organic matter that we didn't burn. That was new for the farmer. And then the farmers would say, but the corn is not going to come through all of that. We didn't burn it. There's too much vegetation sitting on the corn seeds, and it's not going to work. And then we would come back 3-4 weeks later, and the corn would come beautifully through all of that decomposing carpet. And the cassava would come up, and the bananas would start coming through. And suddenly the whole thing looks like a lush mix of crops and helper trees coming through that thick mulch. And the farmer goes like, wow, I didn't expect that, because they've never done it like that. And then about 3 months later, it looks like infestation nightmare. And the farmer would go like, what am I going to do now here? I don't know what to do here now. The pigeon pea is going nuts and all of those things. And then we come in, okay, you want a corn crop. Now it's time to, or let's say after 6 weeks, yeah, you want a corn crop. So let's slash into the pigeon pea so it doesn't dominate over your corn. And so we do step by step with the farmer, showing how to deal with that rampancy because they've never done it like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, design, very minimalistic. The strategy, timing. Management with the right timing, selective weeding, selective pruning. That's what's important. The design is something you make up on the day usually, or for
It's interesting because a lot of people put the design on a pedestal, basically saying it's the most important, and that's actually, I think, one of the main reasons why people actually hire consultants, because they want someone that can make them a design, when actually design is a bunch of theory in reality, and you don't need to really have it. For me, I like to have it because it's visual, it's cool, and I kind of enjoy making them. I make them fast, so it's okay. But sometimes I could just think it through, and I'm like, okay, we're just gonna combine these plants, and in 1 minute I know what I'm gonna plant. And it's pretty clear to me, and you don't have to make a fancy thing with 20, 30 plants in there. There's no need for that in reality, because the efficiency is really in making it simple. Because if you have to overthink all that, first off, even on the planting, I've seen systems like that where it's just too complicated to plant, and even the planting itself takes a long time. And then thinking that if that takes a long time, imagine the management, how long that will take to just have to, fiddle around a certain plant and be like, oh, but this plant, I need to cut it less than this one, or etc. You know what I mean? So the design is really something that is glamorized within this space. That's for sure. And it's not that complicated. And it's something we should be able to do without having a paper in hand. Like that shows, I think, that it works the best when you actually don't have that paper in hand. It means it's a simple system and it's going to be easier to manage. And I think for me, I see a correlation, a really clear correlation. The simpler it is and the least you need a design for it, and the more it will actually work on a bigger scale, and you won't have to be involved with too much. Yeah, I mean, spending too much time in that system. I mean, we don't want to be managing something like that. You have to go 4 times, 5 times in a year in the Mediterranean climate. I mean, because these plants have different times of flowering or different times of growth and regrowth, and then there's this one plant that regrows, and that you have to cut 8 times, but you only have to go in that place for that plant, so it doesn't really make sense. So, yeah, at the end of the day, it's you make a really good point there with the design.
add to that, a lot of syntropic food forests nowadays that you see, they are on big scale and they are on flat land, right? So that means, of course, you have to have an idea how many plants you need to buy from a nursery. Sometimes you even have to order it a year in advance if you want certain grafted plants.
Yeah.
Like if you want to make an avocado orchard here on a big flat piece of land, you have to order the grafted plants a year ahead, otherwise you can't get them. So of course, for those sort of things, for your main cash crops, you need some sort of a design pattern so you know how much you order.
Yeah.
There's all of that, of course there is. And but then there's also other situations, like for us here, we are on a slope, it's an undulating landscape. Every square meter is a different thing. If you make a design and then you go out, you dig a planting hole and you go like, nah, that place is not for the plant that I intended for. I need to use such and such plant here as a crop. Otherwise, it's not going to yield here because the topsoil is too thin, or it's too wet here, or it's in the frost, whatever. You figure certain things out as you plant, and then you have to adapt to that microsite. unless you're on this sort of flat land that's all homogeneous and you do big scale, yes, okay, there's maybe room for more design work. But then, see, the thing with the design is, I think it comes from the permaculture world. And when Bill Mollison wrote the designer's manual, there was 1780s when design was the word that everybody used. Everybody wanted to be a designer. There was the fashion at the time. So the design label, everybody wants to be a permaculture designer. Nobody wants to be the day-to-day chore manager of permaculture. So you often had people that became designers before they would even know how to manage something. So you have people designing, say, silvopasture for certain animals they've never ever managed in their life. How is that going to work?
Yeah.
So, but it was chic being a designer. It's, at a party, that sounds much better. You're a designer rather than a pruner.
But it's completely out of touch with reality in the way you're saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are good designers out there as well that understand the situation, say, hey, look, if that was my side, I would do it like that and make a sketch, make a design, and sure, it can work.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that something that you do in the long run with observation and adjustments, experimentation and organic development can beat that design hands down, because it's more relevant to the site than any good designer can do for you. And that's the beauty of the Syntropic system, you see. We often have this idea, and that's, I think, again, this is landscape design focus that you often find in permaculture, where you have this design or that picture, that landscape design sort of approach to things that make it incredibly static. In Syntropy, you find that once you go through your placenta and you have certain things coming up in amongst, and you go through the rampancy phase or the infestation phase, and you have overplanted everything, that gives you so many options to then fine-tune, change your direction. You might find the crop that you had in mind is actually not going to work out in your climate for some reason.
Yeah.
It's just too moist. You get a certain fungus that you can't deal with because it's just not right for the place. Something changed. But you have another crop in there that you didn't take serious earlier, but you had in anyway because it was easy to direct seed. And there are certain crops you can use either as a helper plant or as a crop as well. And then you can just change your direction and then go into something else without having to start from zero. It's like, say you're a potter and you put a lump of clay on the wheel, and you say, oh, I'm going to make an ashtray. It's easy, start making an ashtray. And then after a while you go like, oh, that's boring. Or actually nobody is smoking here. Or the guy I wanted to make it for stopped smoking. Maybe I make it into a flower vase, and then you make it into a flower vase. But, you're already on the way. And then you can take it into a different direction. That's the beauty of a Syntropic system. It is incredibly flexible.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Well, we've been speaking for an hour and a half now, so I think I'm gonna just go on to the closing there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Look, that was a great interview. Like, there was a lot of nuggets of information here, and especially coming from you, who's worked with Ernst since the beginning on his farm. That's really interesting. And yeah, I mean, just wanted to say that there's this documentary about your family farm. How is it called already? On this Happen Films movie.
Oh, yeah, the Food Forest Farmers, I think it's called.
Yeah, Food Forest Farmers, like Happen Films. If you look that up and then type permadynamics with it, you should be able to find the progress of this clay slope that I was helping to manage KLAUS, actually, to manage with KLAUS like a year and a half ago. We were just cutting down some eucalyptus and some ingebean and things like that. So that was fun and learned a lot there. That was really nice. And yeah, I just want to ask you, where can we find you and your family's work, and what kind of things you want to say that you guys do on that platform You can talk about the SAP platform and etc. But yeah, where can people find you?
Yeah, my daughter has done a lot of work on the social media side, and she's also a keen Syntropic food forester herself. She has her own little patch here, and does installations and designs for people that want the design. And so she's very active on Instagram. So PERMADYNAMICS on Instagram. Yeah, the Happen film that you mentioned, that we had done by this lovely couple that go around doing documentaries on permaculture projects around the mainly New Zealand, Australia. That got over 2.5 million views now. It's kind of
Wow.
it's really humbling to see that how many people watched that and the feedback we got from it. That's a bit about our family life, how we work as a team. So yeah, the whole family is involved, all in their own way of expertise. We don't just do food forests, we also do food processing and market gardening and earth building and all these sort of things that are related to Syntropic. So in that sense, we are working in the permaculture framework. It's different elements coming together, the animals that are part of the system and whatnot. And we also have a platform where we post weekly videos, either some webinars, lectures that we do for our interns that we have at the moment, or what we do in the farm, why we do it, how we do it, to give you a bit of more nuances on Syntropy, all its different settings and circumstances, where we show anything from a beginning food forest to how we manage our 20-plus-year-old food forest here. And then over the last 2 years, we worked on that web app called SAP. You can find it on sap.earth. I mean, you can find all of those things on our website as well.
I'll put up a link as well.
Dynamics, yes, thank you. And the web app we did together with a software developer who followed us on our learning platform for a while, and then he approached us to go into partnership, setting up that tool where we have over 600 plants that can be very useful in a syntropic or permaculture or reforestation context anywhere in the world, different climate zones you're covering with that. Just to give you ideas what plants you could bring into your system that can help you on the way towards abundance. And it gives you either food or whatever other products, but at the same time, how you manage them within the system, different style of prunings, propagation, how you find their strata, and so on. And then there's it's not a design tool. I wouldn't call it a design tool, but it's a planning tool to make sure that you have enough coverage for the different strata in the system that you're installing, different strata, and also over time, so that you're not getting to year 10 and you find out, oh, now I don't have enough emergence for that lifespan, or not enough low strata for the long run, all these sort of things, because sometimes it is really hard to get the low strata covered later on in the life of your systems if you don't bring it in at the beginning. Yeah. So it is like a reminder, hey, think about the 10 years, 20 years down the line, what are you going to have as an understory? You want to bring it in now. What are those plants that you can direct seed or put in as a wand or whatever you do? So it's kind of like a way to make sure you tick all the boxes so you have enough plants to start with, because bringing in plants later is the problem. So it's not a design tool that tells you, I mean, it can tell you that too, what distance you plant them, but that is sort of secondary. It's more important that you actually figure out what species you want to work with. So it cuts through a long experimentation phase that you otherwise might have. And it comes mostly out of our experience in different climate zones around the world, what we figured out. and what we used, but also based on the experience of other people that we are in contact with, that we exchange knowledge, like Scott Howell, or practitioners in Europe, like Ernst Son, when he worked in Europe, we exchanged information with that, and so a lot of long-term practitioners that we collaborate with, that we exchange information with, and that information then made it into that plant. We call it the plant dating site. So if you're looking for plants that you want to date on your land, that's it.
Exactly. Find the plants that are matched to you. Yeah.
Step app, the Tinder
Nice.
for.
Well, that's great to hear. I'll put all these links in the description below. And yeah, thanks so much, Klaus. That was a wonderful interview, and always good to get some of your insights. And yeah, here we go.
Well, all the best for your project, and I can tell you're very ambitious and nerding into the Syntropy in a big way. That's great to see.
Mhm.
We need more people like that. So all the best with your platform and your land and your learning on that. It's always great to observe that and see your experience, and your experience also gets transformed into our learning and sharing on our platform. So any plants that you come up with that are key for you will end up on SAP as well. So yeah, that's how we get to work together on creating this more beautiful world every day.
Indeed.